Hello there, Homeschool Nolan here to help you navigate learning in the digital age. Today I'd like to talk to you about Chinese history and why I believe young people today should study Chinese history. China has certainly been in the news a lot this past year. What seemed like a backwards, impoverished country just a few decades ago has become increasingly powerful and relevant to our everyday lives. But China remains a country that few Americans truly understand. And the reason for this is that few of us in the West have ever taken a class or studied Chinese history. When I was growing up, the public schools I attended taught a history curriculum that was understandably centered around American history and Western civilization. I didn't take my first class in Asian history until my junior year in college. Now, one of the things I love about homeschooling is that you don't have to wait until college to learn about important subjects. And I definitely believe that Chinese history is one of those subjects that has become increasingly important and relevant since the time I was in school. So why study Chinese history? The reason I believe young people should study Chinese history is because in order to understand a country, you must first learn about and understand its history. And the reason young people should better understand China is because if current trends continue, they will likely grow up into a world where China continues to assert itself and grow its influence in the world. To borrow from David Goldman, a writer for the Asia Times, while your children may not be interested in China, China is interested in them. And what I mean by that is that China, as an economic power, will continue to be interested in all of us as consumers of products made in China. As China grows its capabilities in artificial intelligence, they will continue to be interested in the data they can collect from the apps that have been installed in everyone's smartphones. And as a global power, China will always be interested in the opinion people have of China. Now, as China has grown economically over the past couple of decades, many in the West have shown dismay that China hasn't always turned out the way they expected them to. For example, as China opened up its markets to global trade and capitalism, many Western leaders had assumed that China would eventually evolve into a liberal democracy like Taiwan and South Korea did back in the 1980s. But their assumptions were wrong. They were wrong because they made assumptions based on Western thinking and the experience of Western allies. Had they instead considered China in the context of over 4,000 years of history, they could have foreseen that China was not likely to follow the pattern of other countries. You see, China, for most of its 4,000 years, has been ruled from the top down as a centralized state with an emperor ruling at the top with a mandate from heaven. In times when China did not have a strong emperor at the top, it was almost always in the throes of civil unrest, rebellions, and chaos. What many people in the West may not understand is that the country we know as China is not a homogeneous society. It is instead made up of over 50 ethnic groups and nearly 200 spoken dialects and languages. Without a strong centralized state ruled from the top down, China in the past has always been prone to splitting apart and mired with internal turmoil and unrest. In addition, a strong centralized government with top-down rule has always been necessary and needed in China in order to conscript and mobilize the massive labor forces needed to build the great engineering and construction projects throughout its history. And this leads me to another continuing theme in Chinese history, and that is the great scientific and engineering achievements of China. China, in the past couple of decades, has impressed the world with their rapid rise of factories and modern cities. They have managed to wipe out extreme poverty and move millions from the farms to the cities. On top of that, they've built tens of thousands of miles of high-speed rail lines, world-class airports, and some of the world's tallest skyscrapers. Many people in the West when they visit China today, are simply in awe of how they've been able to build new infrastructure seemingly more advanced than anything you can find in America's cities. But again, if you examine Chinese history in the context of 4,000 years of history, you wouldn't be surprised that China has always been great at constructing engineering marvels. China is the civilization that not only built the Great Wall, but they also built the mighty Grand Canal. This is a canal over 1,000 miles long that links the mighty Yellow and Yangtze rivers together. It was built way back in the 7th century and pretty much built by hand by over 5 million men, hundreds of years before the Industrial Revolution in Europe, and the Grand Canal is still in use today. The Chinese also invented gunpowder, the compass, paper, and printing long before they appeared in Europe. Indeed, while most of Europe was mired in the dark Middle Ages, China was by far the most technologically advanced civilization in the world. And China remained the preeminent civilization in the world right up until the 19th century. It was in the 19th century when the Industrial Revolution had finally come to the West and helped countries like England leapfrog over China and help begin what many Chinese refer to today as the century of humiliation, when China fell prey to imperialism, famine, rebellion, revolution, and war. It wasn't until 1949 when China finally had a stable government again, led of course by Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communist Party, which is still in power today. Now, Westerners who can only look back a couple hundred years may view China as a poor, backwards country that suddenly became wealthy in the past few decades only because they turned to Western-style capitalism. But most Chinese don't view it that way at all. They instead view the century of humiliation as a brief but bitter aberration in their 4,000 years of history, and believe that China is once again on the cusp of restoring its preeminence in the world. But will China reclaim its preeminence again? Will they surpass the United States and have their system of government and have their values become the preferred model for people around the world? That in large part will depend on how our children grow up and respond, and whether they grow up viewing China as an opportunity or more as a challenge. And that's why I believe the history of China is a subject that every young person today should consider studying. Then this leads to the question, how should one go about studying China? The challenge of studying Chinese history, of course, is that it has a long 4,000 plus years of history, as opposed to about 250 years for the United States. This can make it harder to decide exactly where to begin and where to focus on. I also have personally found it a bit more challenging to find good books written in English about the subject. I have here one of the books I used when I studied Chinese history at Princeton. It's called A History of Chinese Civilization. It's pretty dense and somewhat dry reading. I recently found The Story of China by Michael Wood, who also made a documentary series tied to this book on PBS. The prose in this book is more contemporary, and the author's enthusiasm for the subject really comes through. So if you're looking for a one-volume introductory overview of Chinese history, I recommend you check out this book. As for kids, you can always search on Amazon. I found this book called Ancient China for Kids from the Baby Professor series. It comes with illustrations of emperors and pagodas and other artifacts from ancient China. Now, you may find other good books and documentaries as well. One of the joys of homeschooling and learning in the digital age, of course, is that great learning materials can be just one click away. Whatever materials you choose, I hope you find the subject of Chinese history both fascinating and interesting, as well as relevant. The 20th century, of course, was regarded as the American century. It remains to be seen who will lead the 21st century. That will largely depend on our children. And the best way to prepare them for the future is to help them understand and learn about what's happened in the past. And I hope you found this video helpful as you prepare your children for the future. If so, please click subscribe and leave a comment below. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.